Authentication is about proving identity, and it does so by relying on different categories of factors and different technical methods to establish confidence. At its core, authentication answers a simple question. Is the entity requesting access really who or what it claims to be? In practice, that question is rarely simple, because identities can be human users, devices, services, or applications, and the consequences of a wrong answer can range from minor inconvenience to catastrophic breach. Authentication sits at the front of almost every security control chain because authorization, auditing, and accountability all depend on it being done correctly. When you think about authentication, you should think in terms of assurance strength rather than convenience alone, because the method you choose determines how hard it is for an attacker to impersonate a legitimate identity. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to the CISSP books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Authentication factors are traditionally grouped into three categories: something you know, something you have, and something you are. These categories exist because each represents a different way of proving identity, with different strengths and weaknesses. Something you know relies on secrecy of information. Something you have relies on possession of an object or device. And something you are relies on inherent physical or behavioral traits. The categories matter because attacks that defeat one category do not necessarily defeat the others, which is why combining them increases security. Understanding these categories also helps you evaluate claims about authentication strength, because many failures occur when two mechanisms that look different actually rely on the same underlying factor. Clear thinking about factors is the foundation for designing authentication systems that are resilient rather than merely familiar. Knowledge factors include passwords, personal identification numbers, and answers to shared secrets, all of which depend on information remaining secret. Passwords are the most common example, and they illustrate both the utility and the fragility of knowledge-based authentication. If a secret is known only to the legitimate user and the verifying system, then possession of that secret can prove identity. In reality, secrets are reused, guessed, phished, recorded, or leaked, which means knowledge factors are often compromised without the user realizing it. Shared secrets, such as security questions, are especially weak when answers can be guessed or discovered through public information, making them poor indicators of identity. Knowledge factors are easy to deploy and understand, but their reliance on human memory and behavior makes them inherently vulnerable at scale. Possession factors rely on something the user has, such as a physical token, a smart card, or a device-based authenticator. The idea is that even if an attacker knows a password, they cannot authenticate without also possessing the required object. Hardware tokens and smart cards provide strong assurance when managed correctly, because they can store secrets securely and perform cryptographic operations internally. Device-based authenticators, such as those built into phones or laptops, extend this idea by tying possession to a registered device rather than a separate object. The main risk with possession factors is loss or theft, which is why revocation and life cycle management are critical. When possession factors are well integrated with identity systems, they significantly raise the cost of impersonation by requiring physical or logical access beyond stolen credentials. Inherence factors are based on something you are, typically measured through biometric characteristics such as fingerprints, facial features, or iris patterns. These factors are attractive because they are difficult to forget and hard to share intentionally, which makes them convenient for users. Biometric systems do not store the biometric itself in raw form, but rather store a reference template that is compared against a live sample during authentication. The security challenge is that biometric traits cannot be changed easily if compromised, and false acceptance or false rejection rates must be managed carefully. Environmental conditions, sensor quality, and changes over time can all affect accuracy, which means biometric systems must balance usability and security. Inherence factors are powerful when used appropriately, but they require careful design and governance because errors and compromises have long-term implications. Authentication methods vary widely depending on protocol, device type, and assurance requirements, even when they rely on the same factor categories. A password entered into a web form, a password used in a network protocol, and a password protecting a local device all behave differently from a security standpoint. Some methods transmit secrets directly, others derive keys, and others use challenge-response exchanges to avoid exposing the secret itself. Device capabilities also matter, because a managed workstation can support stronger methods than an unmanaged browser session. Assurance requirements drive these choices, because access to a low-risk service does not demand the same rigor as access to administrative controls or sensitive data. The method is the technical expression of how a factor is verified, and poor method selection can undermine an otherwise sound factor choice. Single-factor authentication relies on one category of factor and therefore offers limited assurance against compromise. If the factor is something you know, such as a password, then any attack that reveals or guesses that secret is sufficient to impersonate the user. Even when the password is strong, single-factor authentication provides no protection against phishing, credential reuse across services, or malware that captures keystrokes. Single-factor approaches are still common because they are easy to deploy and user-friendly, but they should be reserved for low-risk scenarios where the impact of compromise is minimal. The security lesson is not that single-factor authentication is always wrong, but that its limitations must be acknowledged explicitly. Treating single-factor authentication as adequate for high-value access is one of the most common root causes of identity-driven breaches. Multi-factor authentication combines factors from different categories to increase resistance to compromise, making impersonation significantly more difficult. By requiring, for example, both a password and a possession factor, the system ensures that compromise of one factor does not automatically grant access. This combination is effective because the attack paths for knowledge, possession, and inherence factors are different, forcing attackers to succeed on multiple fronts. Multi-factor authentication also provides resilience against common attacks such as phishing because possession-based or biometric checks cannot be satisfied by a stolen password alone. The strength of multi-factor authentication depends on using truly independent factors rather than two mechanisms that both rely on the same underlying secret. When implemented correctly, multi-factor authentication is one of the most impactful controls for reducing account takeover risk. Password-based methods deserve special attention because they remain widely used and because their security depends heavily on implementation details. Strong password-based authentication requires secrecy, uniqueness, and rate-limited verification so that guessing and replay attacks are impractical. Secrets should never be stored in a reversible form, and verification should rely on cryptographic hashing designed for password protection rather than fast, general-purpose algorithms. Rate limiting and monitoring are essential to prevent attackers from making unlimited guesses, whether online or through automated abuse. Uniqueness matters because reuse across systems allows compromise of one service to cascade into others. When these properties are enforced together, password-based methods can be serviceable, but they rarely provide sufficient assurance on their own for sensitive access. Certificate-based authentication uses cryptographic keys rather than shared secrets to prove identity, which changes the threat model substantially. In this approach, the authenticating party proves possession of a private key by performing a cryptographic operation that can be verified using a corresponding public key. Because the private key never needs to be transmitted, interception of network traffic does not reveal the credential itself. Certificate-based methods are commonly associated with public key infrastructure, which provides a framework for issuing, validating, and revoking certificates. The strength of this method depends on protecting the private key and managing the certificate lifecycle correctly, including expiration and revocation. When done well, certificate-based authentication provides high assurance and scales effectively for both users and devices. Token-based methods include time-based codes and challenge response mechanisms that generate one-time values used during authentication. Time-based tokens typically produce short-lived codes that change at regular intervals, reducing the usefulness of intercepted values. Challenge response mechanisms work by having the system issue a challenge that the token or device must answer correctly, often using an embedded secret or cryptographic capability. These methods are effective because they limit replay and because the authentication value is valid only for a short time or a specific exchange. The operational considerations include token distribution, replacement, and synchronization, as well as user education to avoid social engineering. Token-based methods are a practical way to add possession factors without requiring complex infrastructure on every endpoint. Risk-based authentication methods evaluate context such as device state, location, and behavioral signals to adjust authentication requirements dynamically. Instead of treating every login attempt the same, these methods assess risk and may require additional factors when conditions appear suspicious. For example, an authentication attempt from an unfamiliar location or device may trigger a step-up requirement, while a routine login from a known environment may proceed with fewer challenges. Behavioral signals can include typing patterns, access times, and historical usage profiles, all of which help distinguish legitimate users from imposters. Risk-based methods do not replace strong factors, but they augment them by making authentication responsive to changing conditions. The security value lies in reducing unnecessary friction for low-risk activity while increasing scrutiny when risk rises. Mutual authentication extends the concept of identity verification by requiring both parties to prove who they are, reducing the risk of impersonation on either side. In mutual authentication, the client verifies the server and the server verifies the client, ensuring that neither is unknowingly talking to an attacker. This is particularly important in automated systems and service-to-service communication, where a compromised endpoint could otherwise impersonate a trusted service. Mutual authentication helps prevent man-in-the-middle attacks by ensuring that both ends of the connection have valid credentials and trust anchors. It also strengthens accountability because both sides can log and verify the identity of their counterpart. When mutual authentication is used, trust becomes bidirectional rather than assumed. Authentication factors and methods work together to set identity assurance strength, and the key is choosing combinations that match the risk of the access being granted. Knowledge, possession, and inherence factors each bring different strengths, but none are sufficient alone in high-risk contexts. Methods such as passwords, certificates, tokens, and contextual evaluation translate those factors into technical reality, with varying resistance to attack. Multi-factor and mutual authentication raise the bar by forcing attackers to defeat multiple independent controls, while risk-based approaches add adaptability to changing conditions. Strong authentication is not about maximizing complexity everywhere, but about aligning assurance with impact so that sensitive access is well defended and low-risk access remains usable. When factors and methods are selected deliberately and managed consistently, authentication becomes a reliable foundation rather than a recurring point of failure. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.